Cheshvan, Samech Vav, page Shin Samech Aleph.
Right, so we saw the difference between the Eved Poshut, the Eved Naaman, and Kama in several details and several Oifanim. And we saw that the union of the Eved Naaman, even though he has the Mila that he improves and brings Shevach into the properties and the ownership of the master of the Ordain. Nonetheless, that's done on the day. People, we saw that that's done in Inyonim, which are outside the Ordain himself. And therefore it's done in things which are what we describe with the expression min ha-mukhan, it's already there, kilo, in other properties, in another Inyonim, and through his ability to make what you might call business deals, Inyonim ke'ela, then he brings the profit and the improvement and the aliyah in the properties and the general ownership of the Adam. But we saw that's all through connection and through combination of other koiches and other ownerships outside that of the order. And therefore, it's not a thing which is done b'yigiyas kapol. It's not that he works hard with his hands or physically, but it's an intellectual and what you might call elevated form of improvement of the whole state of the ordain's ownership in his household. And Mela we saw ein b'zeh tainu kol kach. It's not a union of tainu gamiti by the ordain, even though for sure he's very pleased and satisfied with the improvement in his general household. But it's not a union from tainu gamiti as if he would have done it himself, as if the Ordain himself would have been involved in these Inyonim, or they come, as we saw in even from Min HaMuchan, it can be compared to somebody finding something already prepared and ready, even though that's a thing to his credit, it's going to improve his situation. But since he himself wasn't personally involved with all, it wasn't a union of effort on his part, that even though he's tremendously pleased and has nachashua from the fact that these things are added into his general richness and his general well-being of Vibalda, that didn't come through his personal interference or sort of intervention. Therefore, Aim said Tainu Kol Kach. We saw right down at the end of Shin Samech Vav. Ukemesha Meitzer Dikvam Muchan Hadora Commission is Burli Yil Diba Master Hanal in Achreya Vaya Kerchem Teilecha. And then we saw in the brackets of Moikein Eitzah Eved, the same thing is not only by the benefactor or the beneficiary of the efforts made by the Eved, but that's the Ordain, but also in the Eved himself, he who produces the profit for the Ordain. As who gamkein min ha-muchan, it's not something that he produces mamish, as we just saw b'yagiyas kapol, through the effort of his own hands. No, he finds these inyonim already mi'muchan b'makeim isacherim, and in other inyonim apart from his own effort. Just that he knows how to improve them, to invest them, to find ways of improving the master's household. So we saw that Eitzel Eved who gamkein min ha-muchan. Shahari ein ze mikoach atzmi mamish, ki im mitzad ilui ha'odei, mishum ze nishkasher elo, v'chamishin nizboya diba maschil ela hadvorim. one of the drushim prior to that drush, Achrei Havayel Kechem Teilecho. So in the brackets, the Rebbe puts in a slightly deeper, what you might call, dimension in that whole understanding. It's not just that the Eved Ne'eman doesn't work by a gear's kapov, which things which are his own effort and his own product, even though that may be on a relatively simple level, but it's not his own product, because he deals with higher inyanim in improving the household, general ownership of the Odain. I suppose nowadays you would say that he works on the Wall Street, on the internet, and chesed, and all these type of inyanim. But that doesn't mean that it's a good thing to look on the internet. On the contrary, that means that Bocher, what their whole inyan is only to be startled with Torah, to learn Torah, to be Asik and Avedus Hashem, Kol Hayom, Kol Halayla. They don't have anything to do with the internet. Upon him, it's not only that. It's not only that the Eved Ne'eman he deals with inyanim which are got interference from other forces and other people and other inyanim, and mameli he deals with things which are outside his own effort, etc., etc. So the Rebbe puts in details that there's another bracket in the brackets. There's another nakuda that the Eved Ne'eman works kilo ibedvarim that are min hamuchad. They're not really his effort and his product. The whole reason why he's connected with the Odain Melachatchila, the whole reason why he became Eved to the Odain, is that's not something that he gave away himself to the Odain. In other words, that he doesn't really know any miles of anything. He's just like a purchased article to the Odain, giving himself away completely and entirely. And that's an act of koyach hatzmei on the part of the person. He takes himself and gives himself away entirely. But the Eved Ne'eman is bound up to the Odain, mitzad the ilui of the Odain. In other words, he understood melachatchila that this is a great master, or a very worthy master to have to do it. And that's why he became melachatchila makusha at the beginning. So it follows that really his whole effort from the what you might call the very opening point of his kashrus to the Odain is from a dova hamuchan. In other words, because the Odain was already a worthy and elevated individual, Ori appeared on the scene, and he's makusha mitzad that ilui that there is in the Odain, then it's not really koyach hatzmei. He's been drawn by a higher and elevated inyan. If you're a person that has a chush in elevated inyanim, then you're born by an elevated, you're drawn and you become bound up and makusha to something which is elevated. It's almost like a process that is there, mitzad teva hadvarim, as you might say. And therefore the Rebbe said it's like something that you come to a prophet which is already prepared for you by some other power. It's not that you gave yourself away entirely and you, by the work of your own being, your own hands, as you might call it, that you brought yourself to this kashrus. It was an expected inyan, because the Eved Ne'eman is an elevated man. He's a person with elevated chushim, and therefore he was drawn to the ilui, to the greatness of the Odain. The mishum seh nishkasher. It was really for that whole reason that he became a kusher to the Odain. So therefore his whole kashrus is like a dova min hamuchan. It's already something that was there and ready, and being as he's a person with a sensitivity to those in Yonim, he was drawn to it. And therefore his whole kesher to the Odain is a thing that's got a certain, what you might call, prepared and ready story that made it true, made it happen that way. Over the Eved Apostle, he's a mensch who doesn't understand in high Yonim, and his inyan is even heipach me in Yonim Meila. If he takes himself and devotes himself to the Odain, then it's not mitzad any Meila. No, that's purely because he gave himself away. B'kol etzem in Yonim, b'kol mahusay. So whatever he does, it's not because he appreciates not because he really wants the greatness of the Odin, he's just devoted b'etzem to the greatness of the worthy prophet of the Odin. And therefore, when he does it, it's kilo in an even osiyas, the atma, what we call yagiyas kapo. It's like the struggle of his own hands and his own efforts, and therefore the gabi the Odin, it's even deeper than that. The Odin sees his efforts as if it were his effort. In other words, he becomes like, as we saw, an aver of the Odin. He becomes like a limb. So there were ukamosho ubanim shal lamaila. That's all how it is lamata here in the moshel. If we take the two types of avodim, the gabi the Odin. But if we take it lamaila in elakus ubanim shal lamaila, muvan she'eno mamshik b'zeh b'chinas mitzvah soy. And it's moving that the Eved Neman, despite his high chush, his high knowledge and his high appreciation of high inyanim, when I get to the Eibishter, then he's not really mamshik the union of the mitzvahs that are klulim in the atzmus mamish. He's mamshik the union of what we saw before, mitzvahs Havaya, the Indian of the mitzvahs that they already got a shot to high inyanim, to the sviras, and to kavones. Therefore, we might say, by even kloli, that the difference between the two inyanim is what is mavur, habidrushim, and it's the difference between kavones hamitzvahs and kiyum hamitzvahs, bepel mamish, bekabbalah. In other words, it's mavur in the famous hemshich of Samech Vav Zion. There, the Rebbe the Machabit, the Rebbe Rashab, is Mavaya Ba'arich is the difference between the two Eifani in Kiyum HaMitzvahs. It is what's called Kiyum HaMitzvahs, B'Poel Mamish, B'Pshita, B'Kabbalah Seil, only for the fact that he was Nitztave, he was commanded to keep the mitzvahs. That's why he does it purely mitzvah the rotzen of the mitzvah. And therefore the whole kiyum is b'kabbalah seil malchus shamayim. And then there's another form of kiyum mitzvah where when you do the mitzvah, you're machaven in that mitzvah to all sorts of errors, elyonim, to amshachas misayomis which occur in that mitzvah, etc., etc. So we see that it's like a dover hipukli. On the one hand, that appears to be a much higher Indian, a much more elevated Indian with a more sensitivity to Elikus and to Ruchnius, how it is Ba'elam Eselyenim. And the answer is Henochanam, yeah? Muskach. Oh, Mitzad Hasheni, that's not the Indian of giving itself away absolutely and entirely, only because you were commanded. No, you would have done that Mitzad your Gishmach, B'Dover Hazeh, Afilu, Le'achrei, that there's been the commandment given by the Eibush that you would be koifet and rots. The dva mitzvah mitzvah ma'ila that there is in the mitzvah, the gishmak, and the idea that you have in the Olam Yisrael, and yenim, which comes to us that the kiyum of mitzvah is not mamish purely mitzvah kabbalah teil, purely mitzvah the union of tzivui ha mitzvah. I'm thinking the other way, Shasayid does a mitzvah for him because then he's completely and utterly given away. He has no place in the mitzvah, only mitzvah shemi. He's been commanded by the mitzvah and he's been makabel my oil mal. Who say that's why he does the mitzvah, or that we could say that's the two inyanim of these two avodim. Or that's the Eved Neman and the Eved Haposha. And that's what the Rebbe's Maran is here. The Tuif is in two different levels. That the Eved Neman, he's Tuifus Ayin in Gilu Elikus, which has already been there, and already been Nimshach in a form of Gilu, albeit high in him in Gilu. And that's mitzvah Havaya, the mitzvahs themselves have already been Nimshach into a level of Gilu Elikus, Alidei, Sfirais, and in Yonim, where it's possible to be Mechaven Lahem. When you do it purely mitzad the Inim with Kabbalah Seil Bilvad, then you Tuifus the Inim, how it is mitzad Atzmus is Barak. Well, there it's not shy to really be mechavan to the pratim in the mitzvah, because we don't really know what was the episode. Kavanah, what is the Eibush to give out the mitzvah? We only know that he wanted that we should do it. It should be the Inim and B'Peil, and therefore it's the Eibush's mitzvah. It's not you having any part in the mitzvah. And the Far East is mitzvah. So and that's what the Inim and the mitzvahs are mitzad Atzmus. So said the Rebbe, move on that Eved Neman, he doesn't reach that madrega. despite the fact that he reaches a lot of high inyonim, alidei kavonis hamitzvos, but he doesn't reach that inyan. Hagam shemamshik gam ken gilu oilus naili miyoi. He's mamshik very high in yonim, and in an oivim Tosefus bracha. In other words, in the nimshul he brings, as we saw in the Moshel Lamata, he brings blessing into the household of the other. So similarly, Lamaila, he causes what's called Tosefus Gilu Oiros in Atzila. The Ikakiyam are those mitzvahs which are kavonos of, and the kiyum mitzvah the kavonos be the gilas and Atzilas, and in Olam Selyanim, it's only Liyasid that there'll be the gilu of that. So he also brings a different taste to his bracha. Kol mokim hakol hu b'chlal b'chinas mitzvahs havaya. It's all in the level, and that what you might call madriga and department, you might say, which is the inyan for mitzvahs havaya. Shahein b'ha'oiris ha'shayochim l'ishtausel. Ultimately speaking, that's got a shaykhs to ishtausel. If it can be measured in different oiris, amislapshim in the kelim of atzilas, and it can be mishachas the sphere of zu, or the inyan zu, or the hamshocha mesuyemes, then it must be oil that's got a shaykhs to soch to hamshocha v'gilui in the oilamas, and that's the inyan of shaykhs to ishtausel. Maybe it's a door of Yipuchai, Tafki the elevated mention, the mention he's got a chush in Elokust. And in Sphiris Oelien in Vukulu, as he alidei kiyum mitzvahs of his own mamshich ha'in for ha'in seifut shak tegillah. So was it the Eitzah? Somebody should ask the Shamet of him came, why did he need to be an Eved Ne'eman b'chol, so there won't be any Avodim Ne'emanim. We'll just turn everybody into Avodim Peshutim. Was it the mile for knowing all these things, if so? If you do the mitzvahs that way, you don't. So the answer is you got to be both. You have to know what the Eved Ne'eman knows of a Bishash. You actually keep the mitzvah. You got to do it b'poyov. Mamish b'bo so ma'avosho. But that's the whole inyan from Tonchet Tmimim. The Tonchet Tmimim, Kemavur in Iron Base, there's a whole piece in the Iron Base with Rebbe's Mavaya, that the emes of pshitas of an Eved Poshet can only be alidei, what you know, what all these things that the Eved Ne'eman knows. If you know all of the, and then you put that all away at the actual rega at the kiyum mitzvah, and you do it for Kabbalah Seir, then there's another chayas in that Kabbalah Seir. It's another type of bren in the Kabbalah Seir, because otherwise Kabbalah Seir can have a certain what you might call dryness of a certain how they call it, lack of bren, because it's only Kabbalah Seir. And therefore there's Kabbalah Seir which is full with the inyan of the idea and the devekas of the Eved Ne'eman. And Nimta Emes Atomim is a or he's a combination of the Eved Ne'eman with the Eved Poshet. And he's a Ishabas of the two together, but we'll see maybe as we go along. If Hashem will be Mizach to learn further here in the Emshach. We'll see further, but again, in Yonim Eilu. Our, he said, Eved Aposhut, Shehu Bipinas Hanoches Atzmusei Lagamrei Mikol Vakoil. He said, but the Eved Poshet, what he's in is the putting aside of himself, legamre, hanoches atzmusei, legamre, mikol. He puts his own self completely aside. He doesn't want anything for himself. He doesn't want anything to do with the inyan of giluidas and all this, because he doesn't below feel that he's got any place there. His whole inyan is only to do what is the necessity of the other. I mean, that's a famous expression which occurs in the Friedrich Rabbeim. You can't say it doesn't. It does occur here and there. But this is what is very, very common in the words of the Rebbe Rashab. Well, that's his whole inyan, his whole message to the world and to the Talmidim is the inyan from Hanoches Hatzmusei. The putting of the self completely the putting of the self aside altogether. It's well known. The famous remark of the Friedrich Rebbe, what somebody asked him, what is atomim? What do you mean you talk about these people learning in your yeshiva and you call them Tmimim? What is a Tomim? So the Rabbi said a Tomim is Hanochas Hatzmusai. Something that he puts his whole self completely aside. In other words, when he does in Yonim in Yiddishkeit, he doesn't mean it mitzad. That's that you're required to do it mitzad the rotzen of the Eibush Bilvad, and therefore he gives himself away mikol v'koil. Now, what does it mean mikol v'koil? From everything of everything, because the Eved Neman also gives himself away for sure. He's not a selfish being. He's not a person that walks around lighting up a cigar every second moment. The Eved Neman is also a person tremendously involved and tremendously devoted. But it's a difference that he's got a tariz of his own time, his own fulfillment, his own bishmak. Mashiach, the Eved Poshut is mikol v'kol hanochas hatzmusai. And the Rebbe says, v'hu b'koyach atzmei davke v'loi mina muchayan. And he said, therefore it follows in a way that it's really like totally ho. It's really dependent one on the other. That you can only do a thing like that if you do it yourself. It's not that something motivates you to do that or something pushes you to do it. That type of devotion, that type of what you might call in Yiddish Übergegebenkeit, that completely overgivenness of the Eved Poshet, that can only come from you, because it's literally what you might call a start from absolute zero. There's no dvorim prepared or no waiting, dangling rewards, how do you call it, awaiting you, but you're starting from a state of absolute giving of the self away, and you're beginning altogether from what you might call the naught of the zero of the bittul of your own self. And says that that's an in which only you can do. I feel the Eibush doesn't do that for you. That's completely your inyan, and therefore it's called Loi Mina Amuchan. It's not something that you've got already purse there of the which you're drawing on. How do you call it? An account that you're drawing on, but you start off completely below dovo. In other words, that you are, as it were, starting off from a profound efforts, a profound scratch, and you're giving yourself away entirely to the Indian. So the Rebbe said, now notice that in each of these points we take it from both sides. We take it mitzad the Oden, and now there's mitzad the Eved. Sometimes we put the Eved first and then the Oden, sometimes the Oden and then the Eved. But the Nakud is to show how on each madrega there's a parallel, or how do you call it, a corresponding Maila mitzad that Indian, how it is mitzad the Eved and mitzad the Oden. So now the Rebbe says, just like it is in the Eved, that's an Indian of complete Hanochas Hatzmusa, and therefore it's purely his koyach. So he said, "Kamoi came beha Odain." He said that the way the Odain takes that effort on the part of the Eved portion, the way he relates to it, is a Romina Muchan. The Odain doesn't see that the Eved portion is making him reward, he got profit of bringing him bracha from things which are already there. But ki'im nechshav ki'agiyas kapor. It's reckoned ki'agiyah kapor. That's reckoned as if the Oden himself were doing it. In other words, it's so bottled is the Eved that the Oden in the Moshel, he sees that kilo, that was his effort, that's his work. And since it starts off from nothing, and it brings in Yonim Mamish kilo from the bittul muchlak of the Eved, then the Oden can see that as if he were literally working, like we spoke the other night, the Indian of the boreg, that you just dray the boreg, that the Oden sees the Eved Poshet, but that doesn't belittle the Eved Poshet, but it makes him and the Oden a oneness. It sort of makes between him and the Oden a bitla, the machitza, that there is no one between two koiches or two powers. One l'mayla mia tzeita, is that causes a bitla, the whole machitza. Wherever the Oden sees it, that was his own effort. And we see that in the Eved it's not min amucha, because he starts off mamish from and he gives himself away dafke b'koyach atzmai. He's not using any other investment, as you might call it, in order to be poil Indians there. And with the Odin, it's also the same. The Odin sees that bittul so much on the part of his Eved that it's kilu he himself were doing it. It's kilu a direct Indian. He and the Eved become like one Indian biyahad. So the Odin sees that also as not minamucha. It's like as if he were doing it himself, without any combination from any other factor. The word dover here meaning a thing, but meaning the idea of a factor. The Odin sees it as if all this were happening, bliko ta'arevas of any other Indian. Not like it was with the Eved Ne'eman. Like it was with the Eved Ne'eman, then the Odin already saw in these inyonim ki'ilu that there was things that were, it's like a gilu of things that have already become shayach to say this tells us. It's already min hamuchin ki'ilu legabi kol ha'inyonim that the Eved is oisik bohem amamir gam ha'odin oisik itoi gam b'inyonim which are ki'ilu muchanim besoik say the hishtalshelos what does the inyan like we saw the mitzvahs how they're tluim in the Shem Havai. Avamina is harizek moish adam ba'atzmei oise belishum harakovas eidol. Avamina, this is a pillar. Ubezeh dafke nimshach b'pchinas mitzvah soi mamish. Dafke in that it's possible to be mamshich dafke through that type of beetle of the Eved Poshet, and the fact that he becomes like bli shum harkova, he becomes bli any compository, as you might call it. He becomes one inyan with the other, then that is the inyan of mitzvah soy. If I'm going to say when the Odin does, when the Eved Poshet Lamata does the mitzvah for Kabbalah Seo, Malchus Shemayim, he's only being megala the Eivish to Zah. He doesn't have any benefit from his there. It's not Ilu. Yeah, he's saying, oh, this is beautiful mitzvahs and I'm involved and this is tremendous Indian v'chulu. Well, he does it pure mitzvah. This is Eivish to Zah. Him and the Eivish are like one hand. It's like Yad Achas. Therefore, it's possible to call them my mitzvah. Even though, if it weren't for the fact that the Eivish had a mensch lamata, then it wouldn't have been a mitzvah. It becomes a mitzvah. Alidei the mensch. And yet the Eivish says, no, this is my mitzvah. Yeah, mitzvah is soy. Now, Amir is a pile plus von India. So now comes on the Rebbe and he says, V'shoyru sho'inenu. Now he's going to give us now a brief glimpse how this Indian is in Elikus Lamaila, how it is in two different levels. So one can be called, as it were, Shayach Lahamuchan, the tequila has already been prepared to be nimshach by him because everything was there, or it's purely mitzadi atzma. So he said, V'shoyru sho'inyan ho dihina in his boa liyil, in Dibor HaMashkim Chamakir Chayim, that's one of the earlier drushim in Samech Vav, sheyesh beis madreges ba'er ein seif. In the level of Gilakus Lamaila, there are two main madregas. Now, when we say beis madregas, then we're talking on klolis dika level, on general level. Because I said there are many different madregas. I mean, the madregas rabbis in the union from Eretz Yisrael. When we say beis madregas, we mean here two general or klolis dika classifications in the union of the Gilui Ein Seif, or what you might call lack of Seif. And he says, Ha'alef, Bechinas ha'oyer, shehu bechinas hamshocha v'gilui. Now that's very meduet, that expression. The Rebbe said the first one is what we call the bechina, the state or the level of oyer, or that's a bechina v'hamshocha v'gilui. Excuse me, my hello. You got some problem this evening? I'm feeling well.
No, I've had a fever since like dinner.
Huh?
I had a fever since dinner. I thought I could.
If you have a fever, you should go and lay down. You shouldn't force yourself. What? I can see that you're all sort of just not able to hold out with what you're doing. Listen, if you have a fever, you mustn't force yourself to. You still have fever?
I think so.
You must lay down. If you have fever, you must lay down, and also you have to drink a lot. You have to drink liquids, and you shouldn't eat heavy food. You should try to drink for let's say half a day or a night at least. Drink a lot, and if you can get aspirin or APC, simple APC takes temperature down. It's very good at taking down. Okay, and try not to drink sweet things like drinks or only water. Tea, plain tea is very good without sugar. Plain tea, without biscuits and all that. So just tea is very good, and hopefully you'll throw it off. Do you have a bad throat and everything?
Not really. It's just like my head. I can't think clearly tonight.
Yeah. It puts you in a little bit of overstrain and everything. Anyway, you must go and take it easy and do what I told you, and hopefully you'll throw off temperature. Okay? But once you've had temperature, you should take probably tomorrow about half of a day to rest up. You shouldn't come rushing into the Seder tomorrow. Because once you've had temperature, the system gets all thrown out. It's got to bounce back after having had temperature. Okay? I can see that you're really struggling. I can see that it's an old expression in Yiddish. The Augen haben bei ihm geglanzt. Die eyes were going to be glanzt. That's called in Yiddish, glanzen die Augen. So anyway, I can tell you a few little quips about that, but in Kanamochin we're going here into a very deep opinion of the two Madrigas in Erin Tzei. And that is, we saw that one is Beprinus Oyer, Shehu Beprinus Hamshocha Begilui. Now we could say that that sentence is slightly tantalizing, but what that means to say that one Madriga is the union of the Oyer with the Hey idea, the Oyer. Meaning that Oyer, generally speaking, if we talk about divine influence, we call it Oyer, then that's a union of Hamshocha V'gilui. Oyer, beklau, the whole concept of what we call oyer means something which is nimshach from a more oyer, from a source of light. It's already gone forth. Hamshocha v'gilui, just like we see that light lamata lights up something for receivers and makablim. So that hamshocha usually has a aim to it, which is to be megala to makablim something, and that's the idea of gilui. But you can only be called revealing something to, how do you call it, Makablan, can't you,
struggling with lead.
Very,
very
okay,
small.
fair enough, okay, alright. B'chinas ha'oyer, shehu b'chinas hamshocha v'gilui. In other words, it's already two stages. It's gone into derivation from a more, and its union is to light up something, to show something to Makablim. We can even talk about a oyer which hasn't gone out yet from the Abish's atzmos. It's still somewhat kolol inside here. I just don't know where these guys are wandering around. I suppose they have their shir now, do they? It starts about quarter to 9. Yeah. Is there, there's a union of this oil still being kolul biatzmusay. Shelamayla mayla mipchinas ha'oyer ha'meiyah acharei ha'tzimtzum begilui hakav. We have two general levels in Gilui Elokus. One is what we call lifnei ha'tzimtzum, and the other is the acharei ha'tzimtzum. The emphasis is that even Lifnei Tzimtzum, as we'll see here, we already have certain levels which are eventually going to be for the sake of the Makablim, and therefore they're considered as Hamshocha V'gilui. But the whole level of Koidem HaTzimtzum, prior to the union of Tzimtzum, is called Kalul Biatzmusei, even though in that itself there are levels, as we'll soon see. But Kalul Biatzmusei means it's still included or still interwoven within the etzem, and it hasn't really come out yet into the Gilui, which maybe certain levels of it are eventually intended to do. And that's what we can say, even Kloli, just to give a Moshe Kloli al Inyan Zeh, we can say even Kloli that we have a mensch thinks within himself. Yeah, when I say here the word machshava, I don't mean machshava in the ordinary lavush sense, but in a much deeper sense, how a person has got a certain gilui within himself. So he can experience that on two levels. He's thinking about this Indian purely for his own sake, on his own level, in a way which is only reacting for himself. But that means that that's a gilui of his own self, and it's basically for the purpose of himself, or for the level of himself. And then there's a way that he thinks about that Inyan, and it's still within himself, he hasn't given it forth, and it may not actually come forth if there should be some preventative thing. It ultimately, most probably it will, is that's how he's thinking within himself, how this thing is eventually going to be given over to the Zulas, but he hasn't actually gone through all the necessary processes to give it over to the Zulas. He's only considering within himself a way of looking at that in a way that it will eventually be for the sake of the Zulas. And those are two different levels within himself. In other words, he's thinking within himself, either purely for the sake of himself, or he's thinking in such a way that it's eventually going to be givable or applicable to the Zulas. You know, a lot of potential customers that don't quite realize what they're doing. If you think about it that way, then you can understand this whole concept of Kolo Biatzmusei. In other words, it's still within the etzem, it hasn't become Gilu yet to anybody. But it's like purely for the sake of himself, or it's like a consideration within himself that he's going to have to bring this down and give it over to somebody else, which means that there must be some reader already within him that Machshava Kloli is. There's already a reader, but Toichoi, which somehow or another makes the Zulas appear on the scene. In the first case, there's nobody appeared on the scene, he's just, as it were, experiencing it within his own self. But it's already something that is experiencing within himself. It's not Mamish Atzmusei, but it's what we call linked with Atzmusei. Kolo B'teich Atzmusei. And Mamila said to Rebbe, those are the two inyonim that we're talking about at this particular moment. Yeah, he says that there's a oil which is Bam Shocha V'Gilui. Im Yeshu Gamkem B'chinas Kolo B'Atzmusei. Shalamayla Mayla B'chinas Meir Acha HaTzimtzum. Oh, because after the Tzimtzum, then the earth is what we call Meir. It's lighting up and coming directly to the Makabel. And so in our Moshel, the Mashpia, before he can give over even that what he's considering for the sake of the Zulas, he's got to really undergo a big limitation within himself, and make like a kilo gap between him and the Makabel, and then he can start working out practically how it's going to go across. Well, that gap between him and the Makabel, which he has to make, because he's too high for the Makabel, well, that's called the Tzimtzum. That's like a moshel for the Tzimtzum. So the Eibishter Kabiyol also does that, but the Tzimtzum is a much more immense thing, Lamaila. Well, that's called the Tzimtzum Rishon, or the Tzimtzum Ha'ikri, and from that, there then goes out a oil which is Meir. It actually shines to the Makabel. So when you say Meir, you mean you're lighting up to something. But that means that the Makabel is already being taken into account. He's already become real. You're giving the light in a way which is already limited for the way that the Makabel will be able to be Makabel. That's called Gilui HaKav. The Rebbe says that after the Tzimtzum has occurred, and then there comes back this revelation of a limited, as you might call, line of Hashpah, which is called the Kav. Well, that indicates that we've already limited ourselves in such a way, limited the etzem in such a way that we're now able to be mamish meir to the Zulas, which means that even though we can say, generally speaking, that Shorosh of the Kav is in the Ur Shlifnei, Tzimtzum Hazeh, and the Ur in the Amshocha, which is Nimshuk by the Mashpia to the Makabel, really belongs in the Ur the way he experiences it. Really, the Kav Shorosh is in the Inif and the Penimis, how it is Lamayla Mea Tzimtzum. And yet, nonetheless, the Tzimtzum causes in the Kav a initial Hakbola, that it's able to come to the Makabel of in your Nov. Well, that means that the Kav, and here's the thing that is dealt with in many terms of what you might call the pancake. It considers the union of the Kav. We see that the Kav is like a combination. It's like almost a paradox. How do you call it? A union of two opposites. That mitzad echad, the Kav comes from the original oil. It comes from the original yichud of the mashpia with the oil, but it comes through the union of the tzimtzum in such a way that the tzimtzum, which is the koach hagvul, it will delimit, affects and places a limitation on something which is basically unlimited. And so that is like a paradox, and that can only be mitzad the choilus of the Eibishter, or the how do you call it, the omnipotence of Hashem, that He can make two things together. And that's ultimately what the Kav is all about. Whichever way you'll come at the Kav, you can call it the Koach HaGvul, you can call it the Koach HaBligvul. Ultimately, you've got to unite it with these two inyanim together. Suffice it to say that there's a zichar of what comes out in the Kav is already the which is Sha'atu HaMakav, it's already been lifted and it's coming away, that it's Meir Elamah, Meir Elam Kablim. And so there was the Rebbe, that's the which is Shaykh Elam Kablim. That's that which is B'Pchinas Hamshocha V'Giloi Min Ha'atzmas. And therefore he said it's the Hameya Achat Tzimtzum B'Giloi Hakav. So that's the whole union of the two powers and the two inyonim in this what we call the Kav. Well, that's the union of the Ein Seif and the HaGvul B'Yachad. Mikol Mokim Hariu B'Pchinas Mohus U'Matzias Oyer Al Chaponim. Or it's a Mahus, it's by its definition, and it's a B'china of a Matzias of Oyer Al Chaponim. Oyer meaning something which is already lighting up something else, as we explained earlier. The word Oyer means the thing which is giving forth light in order to eventually bring a message with it. Yeah, therefore it means it's a form of Matzias. It's got some entity about it which has got a tachlis to it. V'zehu b'klolos b'chinas eir ein seif lefnei atzimtzum. He said, Gam ma shelamayla b'chinas aliyas harotzen. He said, Gam b'chinas eir ha'etzem, shezehu b'chinas helem oyer. V'kol mochim kol zehu b'chinas amshocha v'gilui min ha'at. So every now and then, just to show you that you know whatever you thought you knew, you get shown that you don't really know. Every now and then the Rebbe puts in a sentence which causes the arousal or the putting on of the thinking caps, how to use the old expression. So here we see that we were getting satisfied that we'd all come down to the which is Mishkali in the Kav, but that's already the Mamish for the sake of the Makabel. It's gone through the Tzimtzum and now it's coming over to the Kav. So the Rebbe said, yeah, fine. That's the lower. That's the lower level of the which is B'chinas Gilui v'Hamshocha, or Hamshocha v'Gilui. And now he says, so B'klolis, in other words, a B'zehu must be referring back to all the aspects of this sentence, not just that last piece. The B'china v'erin seif lefnei atzimtzum, Gam ma shelayla b'chinas aliyas harotzon. V'gam b'chinas oyer ha'etzem, shezehu b'chinas helem oyer. Now that's really a bit of a bomb, because if you're familiar with that mime over there, Kiyum from Koyachayim, expressions exactly as Meduyah, is that even in that tremendously complex, don't quite occur exactly in exactly the type of expression. Oyer ha'etzem. Over there, the Rebbe tells us a lot about what he calls the etzem ha'oyer. Putting it the other way around, oyer ha'etzem. That we have to put on our, we have to think from that. So what we can suggest is like this, that it's Mufar in Siddur in many places, and also mentioned over there in that Drush and in other parts of the Chassidus of the Rebbe Rashab Parichas. As we pointed out before, in the Oyer Ein Sof Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the different gradations, like states or madrigas. So before we get to the actual Tzimtzum, we also go through certain gradations, but they're also forms of Tzimtzumim, but they're not the Tzimtzum absolutely, the absolute Tzimtzum that's in the Tzimtzum Harishon. And that's what we call, there's what's called two levels, Aliyas HaRotzain, and what's called Hashora B'Koyach. In other words, after a certain level of the Gilui of the Ein Sof, there's a level which is purely just Gilui, the Eivish's Etzem, purely for the sake of Gilui Etzem. When I say purely for the sake of Gilui Etzem, that's what it appears. But ultimately, it's not really only that. But it's like we saw, beyond any Hamshocha to a Gilui, to a Makabel, even though it's what he called Hamshocha. And that's what we call Aliyas HaRotzain. That's already after certain levels in these types of Giluim. Now, Aliyas HaRotzain, immediately you say Rotzen, you're already talking about a Koyach Proti. The word Rotzon means a given type of Inyan which we can take from ourselves, a picture of a specific entity, of a power or capacity of the soul, which is called Rotzen. That's what's called a Koyach Proti. Even though it's a Koyach Klali, like every other Koyachas, but it's also a Gavi, the Klolos of the Nevish, and the Klolos of the Ein Sof, it's a Prat. So what happens here is that within the whole Gila, the Ein Sof, Koydom, Tzimtzum, there occurs what's called the Aliyas HaRotzain. The Eibishter begins to reveal that all these Giluim have what you might call a aim, and they have a point. In other words, that up to now there's been all these amazing nuances from the Etzem, Hamshochas, Ha'oras, Mina Etzem, which we call Oyer. All of a sudden it begins to appear that these are all aiming at something. They're all aiming ultimately to reach this amazing thing called the Bria. Yeah, there's going to be a Bria, and there's only going to be Esser Spheres, for example, and there's only going to be a whole Seder of specificality and limitation, which is eventually going to bring about the Gimel Olam as Bria Tzira Vasiya, and eventually it's going to bring about Olam HaZeh, and eventually it's going to bring about the Menj, and eventually it's going to bring about Dira V'Tateinu, and who knows what. That is called the Aliyas HaRotzain, where the Eibush begins to reveal that in all this unbelievable general Gila of himself, which has gone off the Atzmas, that really he's aiming at a specific Matorah, I call it a specific goal. Well, that appears without actually functioning, but it begins to appear. And that's what we call Aliyas HaRotzain. And that's to take an example by yourself. Oftentimes you think to yourself, oh, I would really, this is a tremendous thing that I'd really like to have or to do, or really like to be like this, or face it. And it could be that it's a long way from activity, and it could be, it may not ever become Maisa. I mean, halavai that it will. If it's a good thing, halavai that it will. Yeah, because it has to undergo a whole series of other developments before it actually becomes Poel Mamish. But that's what we call inside the Klolos that we spoke about before, inside the Mashpia, how he is, a Klolos Eitzel Atzmei. All of a sudden there appears a certain, what you might call will or aim, to aim in a certain direction and to achieve certain inyanim. And that's called Aliyas HaRotzain. And it doesn't mean anything B'Poel yet, it doesn't even oblige him yet to anything. He hasn't actually committed himself, but the aim and what you might call the Matorah have appeared within the klolos of his mind. He sort of put forth a general idea of what he would really want, what he would really, what you might call, like to be or to achieve or to do in this world. Well, that's called Aliyas HaRotzain. So that even happens before the Tzimtzum, that the Eibishter radiates the Ur in such a way that there's a certain specificality occurs there without actually limiting the Ein Sof of the Ur. That's the specificality begins to appear on the background of an unlimited oil, which is still unlimited, and that's the beginning of the union of the limitation and the Ein Sof, which ultimately become the Kav, and that's called Aliyas HaRatzon. And therefore it's called the going up of the Ratzon, which is the occurring of the Ratzon, not Gilui Ratzon. Because once we talk about Gilui Ratzon, then we've already become committed to a specific line of action, or what you might call, which is going to cause limitation, and that's already the Kav, or even after the Kav. So Rebbe says the Rebbe, we've got our Inyan, Shovnei HaTzimtzum, which is even beyond this whole Inyan of Aliyas HaRatzon. The Gam, he said, even higher than that, B'chinas Oyer Ha'etzem, Shezo B'chinas Helem Ha'oyer. Now this expression, Oyer Ha'etzem, is an unusual one, because the Rebbe usually doesn't use it that way. Usually he says Etzem Ha'oyer, and here he says Oyer Ha'etzem. So that's obviously meant for readers to, break their heads a little bit to understand. So when he uses over there in that Maimah Kim Chamor, when he uses the expression Etzem Ha'oyer, then he means Oyer, which is not yet for the sake of Gilu, it's not yet really being Meir anything, but on the other hand, it's not the Etzem, it's already Ha'ora. And what's its Inyan? Its Inyan is purely to be Megala the Etzem. But it's the way a Ha'ora is Megala, not the Etzem itself being Begilu, but a Ha'ora being Megala the Etzem. And one of the dugmas, it's only a dugma, it's got limitations, is the oil which goes off from the shemesh. But in that itself, in that gufa, what the Alter Rebbe brings in Shara Yichud, in Perek Gimel, the famous mashal of the Ur HaKol inside the shemesh, not the Ur which is out in the Halal, but the Ur which is mamish Kolul Techa shemesh. That's already our oil which has gone off from the shemesh, but it's inside, as it were. It's more the shemesh than it is the idea of oil, but it's still oil. So the Eibishter Kaviyach also, the Eibishter gives off a light at the beginning. Its whole meaning is only to reveal Him. It's not to, in any way, it's not ready for Makablim yet. It's too high for Makablim, because they can't possibly be Makabel at that level. And therefore you have to undergo this other gradation that we call Aliyas HaRatzon, something specific. It's better V'chuli. So even to the point that you're not, what do you need to Megala that over? If it's only Gilui Ha'etzem, it's not really for the Makablim. Why did he have to be Megala that over Melchatchila? And that question is in effect asked in Chesed, and the answer is that ultimately he's going to give you that as well, even though it's not really meant for Makablim, but ultimately the Makablim are going to get that also. But for our point of view, that's not what we're going into at the moment. So we have to suggest that when the Rebbe says the expression Oyer Ha'etzem, he means that Madrega, and therefore he calls it more correctly what it really is. It's the Oyer of the Etzem. It's a Gilui which is purely to be Megala the Etzem. It's not to be Megala anything for Makablim yet. And in order to get to Makablim, you've got to undergo this whole gradation, which is called Aliyas HaRatzon, which are forms of Tzimtzumim in the Oyer. So the Rebbe, you've got the Inyan of Oyer Shel HaMayla Mibchinas Aliyas HaRatzon. V'gam, he says, so there's a Oyer which is beyond Aliyas HaRatzon. V'gam, and then there's a B'china of Oyer Ha'etzem. In other words, that this Oyer Ha'etzem is even higher than the Oyer which is higher than the Aliyas HaRatzon. So B'chinas Helem Ha'oyer. He said, this is Oyer, but it's the Inyan of Helem Ha'oyer. In other words, it's a Oyer, but its whole Inyan is Helem. And that's a Pele Tikizach. It's a Oyer, but it's Helem. And that's almost like two completely contrasting ideas. That everything is Oyer, it must be to be Megala something. He said, no, this is the Inyan from Helem Ha'oyer. It's Oyer, but its Inyan is Helem. So I mean, why did he have? What do you need a Oyer which is Helem? I mean, that's another question. But the question is that the point of our point is that there is such a Oyer that is purely the Inyan of the Etzem, but it's a Oyer. Or Lagabi, the normal concept of Oyer, it's Helem Oyer. It's like the Helem in Oyer Gufa. Remember, said the Rebbe, Mikol Mokim, Kolze, all these levels and all these madrigas we just mentioned, Hu B'chinas Hamshocha V'gilui Mina Atzman. He said, all that is all Hamshocha V'gilui. It's not the Atzmas, it's not even things which are really shock to the Atzmas. they're giluim, and a gilu is a ha'ora bilvad, and therefore a ha'ora is one on, it's absolutely not b'klal shaykh to the et. So all these inyanim, I feel this etzem ha'oyer, or what we call oyer ha'etzem, or that telem ha'oyer, that's all begilu in even I'm shochav begilu. It's all come out of the Eibishter in a form of a ha'ora bilvad, and so it'd be nimsha, and that's what the Arizal calls, what he refers to as the terem netzl kol netorim v'chulim, or your poshut amamal is kol matzir. So the emphasis is when the Arizal uses that expression, he's already talking about a slightly lower level than the etzemoyer. The Chassidus says that the etzemoyer is even l'mayla mizeh, or what he calls here the ha'etzer, which, as I said, is a slightly tricky expression. I have to say that Rabbi uses it here for the point of showing that it's ultimately speaking, even though it's etzem ha'oyer, of its oyer. In other words, tzika terminology is oyer. It's a oyer of the etzem. It's only a gilu. It's not a inifant atzem. So therefore, he used the expression of oyer ha'etzem, not etzem ha'oyer. We call mocking. Oh, this is only the inifant. I'm sure of a gilu minat. Aval yesh oid madrege b'oyer ein say. Now all these in we just called kolo biatzmusei, like we saw before the Alam Tzimtzum. Anything is still kolo b'toichoy. It's all inside himself. But he said it's giluim in which have gone out in a form of revelation. They're a form of oyer, but they're all still within the etzem. They're prior to the Tzimtzum, but therefore they're called within the etzem. But he said there's another level of oyer which is mamish in his etzem mamish. Vainu rak masha b'yichol teilahoyer she'ein zeh b'kinas mahusa matzias klal uklal gam loi b'kinas ha'oyer shelifnei ha'tzimtzum. Not even in the oyer shelifnei ha'tzimtzum is this ha'inyan from oyer. Now here we meet up with the famous concept of yechoilas, and yechoilas means capability. If the word yechoilas from the word yochel, what yochel means possibility. So when we say yechoilas l'mayla, then we mean that the Eibishter could give off light. He can give off light. That part of his omnipotence is that he can give off light. We say, or put it, one aspect of his omnipotence is that he can give off, he can give off light. But he didn't actually give it off, because if he's already given it off, then it's already oyer ha'etzem. It's not. We're talking about the capacity that he could give forth light. Therefore, that's called atzmusei more than it's called kolab atzmusei. And the lesson from that is that yechoilas means what you can do, not necessarily what you're doing. And therefore, we always have to ask the question, what is your yechoilas? Not what are you doing? What is your yechoilas? We always have to ask, what could you do? And that's the inyan of a Rebbe like Avi Achos. Achos, he said to me, Mikala, what he can do, and what he can do, Gufa, a lot. A Rebbe reveals in him what he could really do. And that's almost unlimited. If you, even in a human being, if you say what you could do, what is your capacity? You could maybe do that. Mitzad the perfection of your etzem, there's almost no limit to it. A mensch can do anything. I don't know if he can fly with his own wings to Mars or something. But within the realm of what humans can achieve, he can do it. He can do almost anything. The reason he doesn't, because all sorts of side issues get in the way of a mitzad the actual etzem. Almost anything is possible. So just imagine by the Eibishter, the Eibishter's yechoilas is kol yochol. There's absolutely nothing that could be given or done, achieved, or v'chule v'chule. But what you say that the Eibishter could do a certain thing, then you're already going down from the shleimus of the atzmas, and you're talking about a certain thing that he could do, kavyochol. Even though you're talking still in the etzem, and you haven't separated from the etzem, but you've already gone down from the perfection of the etzem, and you've gone into a certain level what the etzem could do. But that's already called oyer. That's already called oyer, even though it's not oyer. And with that, the Rebbe is mafarish over there. I'm not mistaken, the Rebbe's Mafarish over there, that's what is written in the Zohar, that the Zohar Kodesh says in Bereshit, the Zohar Kodesh says that there's a level of noirin, of light, the lavinu nehoirin. It's light, but it's not light. They're lights which they're not lights, but they're lights. So can't have your cake and eat it too. It says they're nehoirin of lavinu nehoirin. Yeah, they're not lights. So I mean, if they're not lights, don't mention it. So the Rebbe says, oh, that's the union of Yechoilas. It's not, it's lavinu nehoirin. It's not light because it didn't go off yet. It's not mayim in our atzmos. So why do we call it nehoirin? Because it's already, if you say the Eibusha could do that, then you've gone down from the absolute withdrawn perfection of his atzmos, and you've come into what he could do. And what he could do is already a certain way of describing him almost. It's like a certain level. And remember what he could produce, well, that's already not the actual absolute withdrawnness of the atzmos, and here on the other hand, it's not separate from the atzmos. So that was it. That's the second level. That's the level of Yechoilah. This is a famous concept. Very famous, had it called Musag, the Musag of Yechoilah. He said, Rak Masha Yechoil Teilahoyer, She'ein Ze B'chinas Mahusu Matzias Oyer, Klal. It's not a gilui of anything. It's not an oyer which has come out in the form of a entity called light. It's not anything to do even like the Oyer Shlifnei Tzimtzum, which is a tremendously high level in oyer. This is within the atzma. It's only what he could do. It's not a thing on its own right from the atzma. Ki, look at that. Ki bi'atzmas mamish eno shayach loim achas v'sholem oi dovo. Gam loim b'finas koyach ha'oyer. So here your mind just bubbles out. So here the Rebbe said, if you're talking about atzmas, mamish, then you can't chas v'sholem talk about any other Indian. You can't say there's any other entity apart from him. You should come up and do his atzma. If you say Yechoilas, you're only talking about what he could do, but you're not talking about he may have actually done it yet. There's nothing actually occurred. Therefore you can't say that it's any entity, because immediately you say it's an entity, and it's apart from the atzma. It's not the atzma. People say, what are we actually? He said it's va'ein of b'chinas dora min ha'atzmas, because in atzmas that's not shayah. Chas v'sholem gam lo b'chinas koyach ha'oyer. So the Rebbe says you can't say that the Yechoilas is what we call koyach ha'oyer. Now here he's using the word koyach in the sense of, you say a thing about koyach, you mean potential. So you can't say that the Yechoilas to give forth light is the potentiality of light in the Eibusha. You can't do that. Because immediately you say potentiality, then that means he's already done it. Because by the Eibusha there's no potential and no poil. But the difference between potential and poil doesn't exist. If what you say koyach of the oil, the potential of the light, then you're already talking about light. And therefore, if you're not, when you say Yechoilas, you're not talking about a potential either, a real potential to produce light. You're just talking about an ability that he could produce light. But not that he's actually a mokir for light. Not that he's like this. Immediately you say koyach, you're talking about a relationship between koyach and the dover hanimshuk mimenu. Therefore, not even on that level do we mean it. We mean purely the end of Yechoilas. So he said, Shal zen nema hu ushmoi echad. He said, to that we say, hu ushmoi, that the Eibusha and his name are one. The hu ushmoi, the hu shmoi ushmoi hu, that he's his name and that his name is him. Vashikosuv hashlo. But the Shlach Kodesh is put down in the Shlach. The Sefer Shlach. Yeah, the Shlach Kodesh writes over there that there's a level in Shmoi where the Eibusha and his name are mamish one thing. So everybody breaks their head. It's like, it's a name, it's not him. A name is already a gilu, it's like a ha'ora or something. What do you mean by he and his name is one? I mean, there's in Yechoilas. In Yechoilas, That's he in his atzmas, and the shmoy are really here in his atzmas. There's kilo no shmoy yet, but since you've already said Yecholis, you've already somehow or another mentioned shmoy, but you haven't gone out from the actual pshitas of the atzmas. And therefore, the Shloh writes over there a very fascinating Indian. He said, therefore, the word who means he in Rosh Hashanah, means the atzmas. Is who is a Rosh Hashanah, who ushmoy echad. The word who is who ushmoy echad. That is what the Shloh. Which means that there's a Yidden, when you say who and you mean him, you mean, well, who, what else can you say? I mean, who means he, it means the Eibster. You're also saying who ushmoy echad. But there's a level where in who is shmoy and who are the same. Yeah, that's the Indian for Ato Kodesh for Shimcha Kodesh. Or we're going to say here, Kodesh Ato V'noi Rosh. We'll see as we go along how that comes more into the picture, and then we'll, as I see, you guys wanted to learn a bit of Samech Vav. So you got it. That's it. So everybody looks very sort of goopy. What's the trouble?